This story is called Hace and the Spooky House. It's a Hawaiian story. Once there was a boy named Keoki. Kioki went to see his friend Anton and said, Anton, you know the empty house at the top of the Pali Trail called Beauty and the Beast? Not the Beauty, just Beauty. There was a man who was rich, and he had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. The third youngest daughter was Beauty. That was her name. And she was certainly her father's favorite. Big Klaus, Little Klaus. In a town there lived 2 Klauses, German name, a Big Klaus and a Little Klaus. He was called Big Klaus because he was a big man, but he also owned a large plot of land, and he owned 4 horses. This is the story of Cinderella. There was a girl, she was called Cinderella, who lived with her stepmother and 2 stepsisters. Actually, the stepsisters were younger than Cinderella. Story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears. There was a family of bears that lived in the woods in a cozy little house. There was the great big Papa Bear, the middle-sized Mama Bear, and the wee little baby bear. Hans in luck. Hans had worked for a miller for 7 years, and he decided that that was long enough. So he decided to ask the miller, his employer, for his wages, and because he wanted to go home and see his mother. This is the story of Hansel and Gretel. Hänsel und Gretel, auf Deutsch. Okay. There was once a family that lived, of course, deep in the woods. The father was a woodcutter. The stepmother, his wife, not the children's mother. Jack and the Beanstalk. Once there lived a boy named Jack with his mother. They were very poor. And so one day the mother decided that they must sell their cow. Little Red Riding Hood. Once there was a village at the edge of a large forest. And at the edge of the village lived a woman and her daughter. Her grandmother lived in the heart of the forest, Puss in Boots. A man had 3 sons. The man died, and the 3 sons divided the estate, we say. The oldest son received the house, the middle son received some land, and the youngest son received the cat. This is the story of Rumpelstiltskin. Once there was a miller. He had a beautiful daughter, and the miller had an annoying habit. He had the need to brag, to boast to people. Many times people warned him that his bragging, his boasting, would get him into trouble. It's on a story by Tolstoy. Once there was a man named Martin. He was a mender of shoes by trade, and he lived in a small town in Russia, of course. His room or his shop was in a basement. I'm going to tell you the story of Snow White. We usually call it Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. By Hans Christian Andersen, the Danish storyteller, 19th century. Okay, there was a queen who was a stepmother to her stepdaughter, Snow White. The story is called That's Good, That's Bad. I guess it takes place in India. There was a boy named Bai, B-H-A-I. He was sitting on a big rock one day. Along came a tiger. Run away from me, the brave little tailor. Once there was a little tailor. He was sewing day and night. He liked his work, but he wanted an adventure. So one day he was hungry, and he wanted to have some bread with the cat and the fiddler. Once there was a fiddler who had a cat. But this was a very special cat, as we shall see. The fiddler and the cat entered a town. The fiddler walking along, playing, the cat walking at his heels. This is a story called The Cat That Walked by Himself. Once long, long ago, when all animals were wild, a dog, a horse, a cow, and a cat stood on a mountain and looked down watching man. There was an evil king. He was very evil, but he thought he was a good king. And to his face, all of his followers said, oh, called him the good king. But behind his back, of course, they called him the evil king. And his wife. Once there was a fisherman who lived by the sea, comfortably with his wife. They had a small home, but they had everything they needed, really. One day the fisherman cast his net into the sea. The Little Gingerbread Man. Once there was an old man and old woman who lived together, but they were very lonely. They had no children or grandchildren. And so one day the woman said, I'm going to make a gingerbread man. This is the house that nobody wanted. There was a gray house, and in this house, on a hill, and in this house lived a little old man and a little old woman. They lived alone. And everything was gray. The house was gray outside and inside. This is the little hen. There was once a hen who was busy all the time. She was always taking care of her chicks, cooking, cleaning. She seemed to work all the time. This story is called The Man and the Donkey. It's by Aesop, one of Aesop's fables. A man and his son had a donkey. And one day the man said to his son, come, we're going to take the donkey into town and sell the donkey. The Pied Piper of Hamlin. Hamlin is a real town in northern Germany. So this is a German story. Once in Hamlin was a pretty little town located on a river. Across the river was a mountain, very beautiful. The Princess and the Pea. Once there was a king, queen, and their son, the prince. Prince Philip was his name. And Prince Philip was reaching manhood, and so the king and queen told him that it was time for him to get married. The Princess Who Never Laughed. This is a Grimm brothers story. Die Gebrüder Grimm aus Deutschland. Okay, so once there was a princess, her father was very worried about her because she never laughed. The Seven Swabians. Swabia is a part of Germany, Schwaben, and this story certainly was not made by Schwaben. It was made by their neighbors who don't like them and make fun of them and call them stupid. Sleeping Beauty. Great story. Okay, once there was a king and queen in a peaceful land. They were happy, but they couldn't have children. Somehow they never had children. Okay, this is the Sleeping Princess. There was an Aztec princess. She was very beautiful, of course. And her father was a good man. And her father said to her, you can marry anyone you want, but your husband must be an Aztec prince. The Steadfast Tin Soldier. Once there was a group of 25 tin soldiers wearing their beautiful blue uniforms. They stood tall and straight, all of them brave, good soldiers. This is the story of Johnny Appleseed. When America was still in the pioneering stage, that is, people were still traveling west in covered wagons, John Chapman was a man who lived in the west, not the far west though. This is a story about the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon lived in a cave, strange, and no light came from that cave. In the sky there were stars, but no sun or moon. But the sun grew restless and bored, probably. The Talking Crow. A man and a woman lived on a farm, and a big green tree lay or stood in the yard of the farm. There a crow lived. The crow's name was Shimsaladim. 3 billy goat gruffs. Hard. There was the little, well, let's start with the big. The big billy goat gruff wore a black collar, braided collar around his neck. And he had a deep voice. This is the story of the 3 little pigs. There was a mama pig who had 3 little pigs. But then the time came for Mama to tell the pigs that they had to go out on their own, make their own lives. This is the story of the tortoise and the hare, famous of course. A tortoise is basically like a turtle, very slow moving with a shell. This tortoise did everything very slowly. Kept house slowly, ate breakfast slowly. Thumbelina. Once there was an old woman who lived in a beautiful cottage, and she tended her beautiful garden. Her garden was immaculate, so orderly, so fruitful, so wonderful. Tilly Witch is the name of this story. Tilly Ipswich was the queen of Halloween, the prize, the greatest witch. One bright moonlit night, close to Halloween, she stood on the mountaintop enjoying the scenery. Okay, number 52. The hero is brave in deeds as well as words. This raises the question of hero. Certainly there are people who do heroic things, and maybe there are people who do many heroic things. I'm going to talk about Keoki. Okay, there's a hero. Older brother, Junsak? I think the older brother's name is Junsak. He is clearly a hero. By anybody's standards, he is a war hero anyway. The movie is very interesting in that it analyzes his heroism. It tells us the sources of his heroism. The first source is just a desire to win a medal so that his brother can go home. Later, this becomes deeper. It becomes a hatred of the communists for all the terrible things they did. Then, when his own people, the South Koreans, do horrible things. This is a West African story, Ghana. A man had lots of property, lots of animals, lots of fields, lots of slaves, and he was going to die. Now, in his community, the tradition was that when a man died, he would leave everything not to his own sons, but to his sister's son, his nephew. The story. There was a very old man who lived in Guadalajara, and he was going to die. He didn't have money at all, but he had a diamond, and he had 3 sons. So he had to decide to which son he should give the diamond. The diamond had been in the family for a long time. He didn't want to sell it. This is called the Eagle and the Roosters, but really it's the Roosters and the Eagle. Or really it's just the Roosters. 2 roosters had a fight to determine which one would rule the roost, as the expression goes. And one of them won, of course, and one of them lost. The loser crept ignominiously and shamefully away, while the winner flew up. This is a Filipino folk tale. Often in folk tales, the poor girl, Snow White, Cinderella, marries a prince, and in this case the roles are reversed. Juan, Spanish name, Juan was a relatively poor boy, and he loved to gamble, and usually he lost, but okay, this is the American folk story of John Henry. It was the end of the Civil War, and the slaves were free. John Henry was a black man. He was very tall, very strong, and he worked on the railroad line, building railroads, which required a lot of strength, and very strong men worked there. This one is called Jupiter, or Zeus, Jupiter, and the Tortoise. All of the animals were invited to Jupiter's wedding, and all of the animals came except the tortoise. And then one day Jupiter saw the tortoise and asked why Tortoise had not attended the wedding. And the tortoise said, "Oh, I liked called Mr. Frog's Dream." There was a frog who was very good at everything he did. He could jump high, he could sing beautifully. He could do all the things that frogs do, but better than other frogs. And he was also very boastful. That is, he loved to boast about his superior abilities. And he would talk and talk and talk. Once there was a woman who had a lot of money, but no children. And apparently she had no husband either. She was always sad. And so she asked her friend, how can I get a child? And the friend suggested that she go to a poor woman who lived not far away. The poor woman had 12 children and was desperately poor. And this is the story of the little snow girl, the little daughter of the snow. Once there was an elderly couple, not rich, not poor, who lived at the edge of the forest. But they had no children, and they were sad because they wanted a child so much. And often they would look out the window. This is called the blue cat. There was a king in Indonesia. This king was the king of an island, probably. Anyway, and he loved cats. He loved all cats, but his favorite cat was a white cat. And he kept this cat on his lap as often as possible. This cat had a ruby collar. A story called The Blue Rose. Once there was an emperor in China who was very old. He had a daughter who was very beautiful, delicate, smallest feet in China, and who had exquisite taste in art objects, as the Chinese have tended to have. So, the old emperor was going to die, but before dying he hoped to find the boastful traveler. A traveler had traveled all around the world, apparently, and returned home, as travelers do, to tell people about his adventures and various experiences. One of the stories he loved to tell was that at Rhodes, that's R-H-O-D-E-S, an island in the Mediterranean, I jumped so far that no one had ever seen anyone jump that. Hi, I'm going to tell you another story. This is an Indian story, and I learned a few Indian stories. Okay. The Boy in the Red Sky. Once there was a young couple, Indians, man and woman. They had no children, and they lived isolated on an island. He would go hunting and fishing often. Okay, our first fable of Aesop's fables, we say Aesop, is The Boy Who Cried Wolf. This is very well known, I know, but it's worth telling. A shepherd boy, used to tend the flock of sheep. You need all of these words. And such a job is very boring, by the way. Imagine the boredom of a shepherd. This is the dog and the wolf. One day, a dog was lying near a farmyard gate, and Mr. Wolf pounced on him and was going to eat him. But the dog begged for his life, saying, "Look how thin I am. My master is planning to feed me generously for the next few days. Come back in a few days, and you will find me plump," and needed a donkey. And so he went to another man who was selling a donkey and agreed on a trial. That is, the farmer would take the donkey, see if the donkey was a good donkey, and then buy it or not. He took the donkey home and put the donkey in the barn. This donkey immediately went to a lion was very hungry and hadn't eaten for days. The lion met a rooster and a donkey who were friends, and the lion was going to attack and kill the donkey. The rooster, though, stood up on its hind legs and reached out its mouth, let's say, and crew. That's the verb is to crow. A crow watched as an eagle swooped down onto a lamb and carried it away. "Wow, I want to be able to do that too," said the crow. So the crow went flew as high as it could, and then swooped down on a ram, a big, thick, heavy ram, and of course couldn't lift it. In fact, the ram, a crow, watched as an eagle swooped down onto a lamb and carried it away. "Wow, I want to be able to do that too," said the crow. So the crow went to flew as high as it could, and then swooped down on a ram, a big, thick, heavy ram, and of course couldn't lift it. In fact, the ram barely noticed that the crow was on its back. And worse, the harder the crow worked, the more entangled the crow became. So along came the shepherd and thought, "I will clip the wings of this crow and take it to my children as a kind of for their amusement." So, what is this? Is this a bird, or what is this, Father?" said the children. The man said, "It's nothing but a crow, but it was a crow who wanted to be taken for an eagle." The farmer and the fox. A farmer was angry because a fox repeatedly raided his chickens and killed and ate his chickens. So the farmer set a trap for the fox and caught the fox. In the spirit of revenge, a man had 4 sons, but the sons were always quarreling with each other and could never get along. Sorry. The man tried to persuade them to get along and be united and cooperate with each other, but in vain. So one day the man brought a bundle of sticks to his sons. Once there was an old fisherman. He had a wife and 3 children, but he was very poor and he was very weak. So every time when he went out to sea, he really didn't have the strength to throw his nets into the sea very often. And other men would throw their nets into the sea many times, collect many fish, and he at most 3. The fox and the goat. A fox got stuck in a well, couldn't get out. Along came a goat. "What are you doing down there?" The fox said, "This water is wonderful. It's just so delicious. You ought to come in and join me and try some of this water." So without any hesitation, the goat jumped into the well. Of course, it couldn't get. The fox and the goat. A fox got stuck in a well, couldn't get out. Along came a goat. "What are you doing down there?" The fox said, "This water is wonderful. It's just so delicious. You ought to come in and join me and try some of this water." So without any hesitation, the goat jumped into. Okay, this is about the fox and the grapes. A fox looked up into a tree and saw apparently some grapes hanging there, and the grapes were very ripe, plump, juicy. And he said to himself, "Oh, I would like to have those grapes." So foxes don't climb well, I think. So he tried to jump up to snatch those grapes, but he couldn't reach them. Finally, he gave. This is called The Giant Bird, though I don't think that's a good title. Anyway, there was a boy. The boy was born with boots on his feet. As he grew, the boots grew too. And the boy had, his name was Oni, by the way. And Oni had a second gift or strange ability. He could not die. He was immortal. This is called The Giant Bird, though I don't think that's a good title. Anyway, there was a boy. The boy was born with boots on his feet. As he grew, the boots grew too. And the boy had, his name was Oni, by the way. And Oni had a second gift or strange ability. He could not die. He was immortal. He could not die, and people were afraid of him. Scandinavian folktale. In Scandinavia, especially northern Finland, Norway too, there are Lapps, who are relatively small people who tend reindeer, and some of them wealthy, and there were giants. The giants didn't like the Lapps, and the Lapps didn't like the giants, but the Lapps feared the giants. The giants had were irritable, had bad tempers, and could. This is the gnat and the bull. A gnat was flying around and landed on the horn of a bull and just rested there for a long time. When the gnat had rested enough, the gnat then asked the bull for permission. A heron was fishing for food in shallow water, but the fish were relatively small. And the heron thought, these fish are not worthy of me. I'm going to wait for bigger fish. And so some very tasty small fish went floating by, including one I don't remember. Small fry in any case. This is a Chinese story called The Land of the Blue Faces. The emperor's daughter, little princess, had reached marriageable age, and so the emperor and his wife married her to the lord of Tibet, and Tibet was known as the land of blue faces. Well, the princess was distressed, felt sad. This is a story about the lazy fox. A fox had a farm, but he's clever but lazy, and he had no wish to farm. So he thought, now, which of my animal friends is stupid enough to help me? And he thought of the armadillo, hard shell animal, who looks stupid. So Fox went to the armadillo and said, your land is rocky and dry. Mine is fertile and rich. Let's make a deal. You farm my land, and we can split half and half, 50%, the crop. Good idea. And the fox got to think, okay, when the crop is complete, I will take what is under the ground, you take what grows above the ground. Okay. So the armadillo and his family then worked the fields and the farm, planted, took care of, worked hard. It turned out that year they grew wheat. So when the fox came to collect, he realized that he had only the little roots of wheat, while the armadillo had the whole wheat crop that grew above the ground. You tricked me. Okay, next year I will take what grows above ground, you take what grows under the ground. Okay, so same story. The armadillo and his family and relatives farmed the land. This time they did potatoes, and potatoes grow under the ground. So the fox had potato flowers that grew above the ground, but the armadillo had all the potatoes. Now the fox was getting very thin and weak. You see, I'm weak. You look better that way, said the armadillo. Next year I will take, says the fox, only what grows in the middle. And you take top and bottom. So, do you want to know what I'm going to plant? No. Surprise me. I'll see you next year. The next year, the fox arrives, and the armadillo that year had planted corn. So the fox got the tassels and things at the top of corn and the roots. The armadillo got all the corn in the middle. So the fox realized he had been tricked again, and he had two thoughts. One, that the armadillo is not as stupid as he thought. He had thought that the armadillo was. He learns a lesson there. He had badly underestimated the armadillo, or he had badly overestimated his own cleverness. Second, he decides that the following year he will farm his own land and keep everything because it's his land. But he will have to work, of course. So he learns two lessons. One, his laziness will destroy him, and two, his arrogance. In his arrogance, he had estimated that he, the fox, was much more intelligent than the armadillo, but the armadillo had been much more clever. This is the lion and the wild donkey. The lion and the wild donkey agreed to hunt together, and of course they would share the booty, the prey. And so things went very well because the wild donkey is very fast. So the donkey would run after the prey, stop it, and then the lion. This story is called The Lion, Jupiter, and the Elephant. The problem is that Jupiter is not in the story. Nowhere mentioned, nowhere appears. What? A lion, in spite of his great strength, was afraid, as we learned in another story, of the rooster and that cock-a-doodle-doo. So one day the lion was walking along, heard the rooster's cock-a-doodle-doo, and ran terrified. There was a family which 7 sons were in a family. A man and a woman had 7 sons. The first 6 sons were strong, tall, handsome. The 7th son was weak and ugly, and his brothers made fun of him and made his life pretty miserable. Then, when the parents died, then they really made him miserable. This is called The Love Crystal. It's a Chinese story. Once there was a mandarin who had a palace right near a river. He also had a beautiful daughter. But he was determined to keep the daughter out of sight of people until he could find a proper bridegroom for her. So she remained isolated in a room that the window of which... This is a Guatemalan story, apparently. The Lucky Charm. There was a tribe that lived in the forest. The chief of the tribe was the most important person in the tribe. Second most important was the soothsayer, kind of like shaman, little like shaman. And the man and the lion. The man and the lion were companions traveling together, and each one argued that the man argued that people are stronger than lions. The lion argued that lions are stronger than people. They came to a statue, and the statue showed a man killing a lion. And so the man said, "You see, this proves that people are strong." This is the story of a man who lived 1,000 years. It's a Chinese story. His name was Tong Pang Suk. Tong Pang Suk. Something must have happened in heaven, they think. Maybe 2 pages got stuck together in the book of life there that contains all of our names and when each of us will die. This is called The Frogs and the Grubs. Once there was a beautiful pond, and green plants, trees, grass surrounded the pond, and animals lived there in peace and harmony. Kangaroos, maybe it's an Australian story. Kangaroos, rats, mice, all kinds of animals. Then one day came a big rainstorm. It rained heavily, and the result was that there were many frogs there. Now the frogs didn't like the other animals. They wanted the pond all to themselves. And so they decided that they would try to almost force the animals to leave. So during the daytime they would go to the bottom of the pond and muddy the water so that the water was undrinkable. The animals couldn't drink the water. The animals pleaded with them, "Please don't do that. You're spoiling everything." But the frogs didn't care. And then at night they would croak all night, so none of the animals could sleep. Soon the animals started to go away. One by one the animals left, and soon the animals were all gone. Now the sun had loved that pond and had loved to shine on all the animals. But when the sun saw what had happened, the sun was angry. So the sun shone very bright on the pond, dried up the plants, dried up the trees, finally dried up the pond. The frogs complained, "Please don't, we're sorry." "No, you were cruel and not kind to the animals and the other creatures. Now I'm going to punish you." Now the frogs still had the grubs, and they wanted to eat the grubs. But the sun decided that the sun would shine warmly on the grubs, and the grubs grew. The grubs grew to be strong and climbed out of the mud, and eventually the grubs became dragonflies and were able to fly away. Meanwhile, the frogs continued to pray to the sun, "Please forgive us. Please, we'll never do that again. We will live with the other animals happily. If you just forgive us." Finally, the sun relented, and the sun forgave. And then the sun asked his friend the west wind to bring clouds and rain. And the west wind blew, and the clouds and the rain came, and lots of rain fell. And soon there was a pond again. Soon the grass grew, the plants grew, the trees grew. And when all this was happening, the other animals who had heard the frog's promise, came back. Now they all could live together happily, perfectly, except for one thing. At night the frogs still croak. No one's perfect. No one can keep every promise he makes either. Cute story.